I thought I'd spend some time talking to you today a little bit. Some of you that have been on this channel for quite some time, you probably already know this, but those of you who do not know about it uh, may not know that I'm an author. That is my main job. That's the thing that makes everything go. I, uh, I retired this year in January 21 of this year, and it after 65 years, 65. I am 65. I've not had 65 years in chemical plants, but I retired in January 21st, and I had over 4 decades, over 40 years in chemical plants, at least two and three and four if you count while I was in college as well. And I started writing probably close to 30 to 40 years ago, and I've been doing it for a long time. It's kind of what makes everything else go. It's what keeps everything going, and I try to do that. Everything, the YouTube, the videos I do, the YouTube channel, the videos I do on Rumble, all this stuff, and uh, besides faith and family, everything else is secondary, because the writing's what makes it all go. I mean, that's what it's all about, and that's probably the most important thing to me. As I said, outside of faith and family, the writing is the thing that I really love. It's the thing I wanted to get to and do full time when I retired, and I try to make it a priority. I'm working on another book right now, but I thought I'd just walk you through through my process and tell you a little bit about how I do things and maybe how I got started in this crazy business. I started writing probably 30, 40 years ago. It was probably the late 80s. I began reading books by Louis L'Amour that my dad carried in his lunch bucket. Up to that time, I'd kind of made fun of those books that he carried. But Dad about always had a book in his lunch bucket. And about that time, he always had a book in his lunch bucket. And so one day I decided maybe I should read those and see what it was I was making fun of. Well, he had a book by Louis L'Amour called Flint, and I picked that book, and frankly, guys, it turned my life around. I read it. I read more of them. I read a lot of them all through college. I read them, and somewhere along the line, my mind got to thinking. I got to thinking, well, could I write books like this? You know, who's going to do it? Louis L'Amour. I'm thinking Louis L'Amour is getting a little long in the tooth. He might not be able to do these much longer. Who's going to write books like that? And it was that day I kind of asked myself, began the whole process of thinking, could I do this myself? Could I write books like this? And I think that's when everything changed. I decided to try my hand at it, and I wrote some junk. I mean, some stuff that I wouldn't talk to anybody about, be ashamed if anybody read those first manuscripts. But I kept working and working, and eventually I got something that was, I penned something that was really worth reading. And that was a big change for me at that time. And it was really something that kind of turned my life around. I found out I liked it. You know, I often hear people talk about, they talk about a person being gifted or a gifted writer. And a lot of people seem to think that means that a guy's talented. That writer's extraordinarily talented. And I'm not sure I really believe that. I tend to think a great writer, a talented writer, a gifted writer, the term gifted, I believe in this case, it means that somebody works and writes and stays at it long enough to where that's really what that's all about more than anything else. I think it's important that you get around and You stick with it till you become fairly good, and where people might want to read you and read what it is you wrote. And I think that's what a gifted writer is. I don't think it's a talent. I think it's the ability, the drive, just unwillingness to quit that pushes you onward when everything you've got says, hey, I've had enough. I'm ready to stop this thing. And I think that's the thing that makes somebody gifted. And I know that people disagree with me on that, but I feel like it's pretty important that you be able to do what you say you can and stay with it. I think that the thing, there's a lot of talented writers out there, a lot of them, but not a lot of them are prolific. Not a lot of them stay with it. A lot of them pen one book and find out it's too much work. The difference in me and them is that once I finish something one time, I pretty well know I can do it again. Before I kind of had problems with my feet, I was a half marathon runner. And when I ran my first half marathon, which I believe was about 93, I never run one. And once I completed one, at that point, I knew in the back of my mind that I could do a half marathon. And so it wasn't, you had moments where you wanted to quit like everybody does, but I realized that I could do it. I didn't have any doubts now that I could do it. I knew it was something I could do, and I could enter a half marathon. And although I still had my moments I wanted to quit like everybody else does when they do that, I could stick with it. I'd stay with it till the end. And it's sort of that way about writing books. I'm a terrible starter. I don't really like to start things, and I'm slow about starting things. But things that I've started and I'm into, and I'm getting close to the end, I'm death on them. I mean, a half marathon is 13.1 miles. Once I get to the 10-mile marker, it don't matter if my legs broke or I'm falling down or what it is. When I get to 10 miles, I can get that last 3.1 miles in because I've done it before. I know I can do it, and I don't have any doubt about it. And it's kind of that way with writing. So I start a book. I know I can finish a book. And I will say there's a couple of books I didn't finish for whatever reason. But one of them was a project I wasn't all that excited about, which usually, but for the most part, when I start a book, I finish it. And I don't think I think anybody that's written one book can write a dozen. I'm penning my 14th right now. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about that. The book I just wrote recently was a book called Bitter Water. And I'm trying to get that thing in the air. There it is, Bitter Water. That book there was a book that I just recently had published. It was a book I really I struggled with for a long time. I had this idea for several years, and it involves a bunch of people needing water. I mean, and a lot of things happen on their way to water. I mean, these people. There's a gambler. There's a woman and her child. A malevolent husband. A bunch of killers, outlaws, and a determined lawman, and they're all in pursuit of water and getting to it. And then this book involves around the interactions that these people have in the course of their search for water, and I believe it makes an unusual book. I struggled to write it. You know, sometimes as an author, you've got an idea in your head, but you don't think you're quite ready, maybe you ain't matured enough, or possibly you don't believe you're good enough yet, or the story maybe is not clear in your head. But that was the way with Bitter Water. I struggled with it for a while, and it was probably about 3 years from the time I had the idea till the time I finished writing it, and maybe began writing it. That was one of those books I had. I had 10 pages written on that book when I retired there on January 21. And I only had about 10 pages. Well, I finished that manuscript, uh, I think sometime in May, or by the end of May. And I was quite proud of it because it took some work. And I may have finished that in April. Now I think back on it. In any case, that doesn't really matter. But the fact that I retired gave me time to focus on it, time to devote to it, and that has been the big thing about retirement. The other book I want to talk to you about, and I'm going to tell you about all my books because some of you may not know that I'm well, unless you've been with me from the beginning, you may not know that I'm an author because I haven't been talking specifically about that for quite some time. So you may not know that, and I want to keep you in the loop a little bit. Another book that I have, and that is The 9 Lives of Charles E. Lively, the deadliest man in the West Virginia Colorado coal mine wars. For those of you who aren't familiar with the name of Charles E. Lively, Lively was a spy and a killer in the early 20th century. He was a coal mine spy. Charles Lively worked at that time in 1921. He was making $225 a month as a spy for the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency. And Lively's a bad man. I mean, that's all I can say about it. I didn't find too many redeeming qualities about him, and I would have written him had I found them. I mean, if he was a guy that took in unwanted cats and raised them, or unwanted dogs and found them along the highway and nursed them back to health, I mean, I would have written that. But I didn't find anything about Lively's life that indicated he was that kind of a person. I mean, in truth, Lively was a nasty, obnoxious, mean man, and just, I know for a fact he killed one man in Levada, Colorado, striking miner in April 1914. And then, of course, any of you know anything about West Virginia history and the wars know that he killed Ed Chambers and Sid Hatfield on the courthouse steps in Welch, West Virginia, the McDowell County Courthouse, in August 1st, 1921. And that whole affair, and he shot him down in broad daylight, 10:30 in the morning, and was acquitted in 51 minutes. And all that was set in place by the events of May 20th, 1920, when 13 Baldwin Phelps agents came into Matewan, West Virginia. They entered the town with the plans of throwing striking miners out of their company-owned housing. Company-owned houses. And they came there, they went out and did what they were going to do, and they were met by the sheriff, Sid Hatfield, and the mayor of the town, Cabell Testerman, and they were met and told that they didn't have any right to do it, and that their paperwork for basically they were breaking law for throwing people out of the company-owned housing. And they said they were to stop, and the Baldwin Phelps agents, Albert Phelps in particular, who was running the operation. Albert wasn't running all of Baldwin Phelps. He was their agent in the field. Thomas Phelps was the other guy. William Baldwin and Thomas Phelps were the two guys that run Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency. His brother, Albert Phelps, ran operations out west and in the field. And he had another brother there, Albert and Lee. Lee Phelps was the other one. But that day, 13 agents of the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency came to Matewan, West Virginia, to throw striking miners out of their company-owned housing. And when Cabell Testerman, the mayor, and uh, Sheriff Sid Hatfield went out there and told them they couldn't do it, said they didn't have rights. They were told they didn't have any rights outside of town, so you're out of your jurisdiction, so you can't stop us. Well, that kind of outraged them. They went back to town. They called Bluefield and tried to get some warrants on the Baldwin Felts agents. And later, when Baldwin Felts, the 13 guys, finished up their work, they went back to your ate dinner, and they planned to catch the evening train or late afternoon train back to Bluefield. Well, somewhere in that period of time, Sid Hatfield warned some townspeople that there might be trouble. And whether he directly told them or not, or they figured it out on their own, I suspect he told them. They went back and got their guns, and they were sitting around waiting for whatever might happen. And there are some people that believe that they were deliberately wanting to start a fight with them. Others think that they just had their guns and the fight started. That being said, after they had their dinner and came back, and they were down at the depot, the Sid Hatfield and Cabell Testerman met Albert Felts, and the mayor and the sheriff told them that they had warrants for their arrest. And Albert said, "Well, that's nice. I got a warrant for your arrest too." And then somewhere after that, a shot rang out, and then a second shot. And we don't know who shot those specifically, but the one thing we do know, in the first shot, Albert Felts fell. He went down. The second shot, Cabell Testerman went down, and then it just erupted in gunfire. The whole town was shooting. The Baldwin Felts agents were shooting. The Baldwin Felts people, there was a book written where they tried to explain that only 3 of them had weapons because they'd cased all their guns, and they were unarmed. I can tell you for a fact that is untrue. Anybody that tells you that is doesn't know what he's talking about, hasn't researched the story, or just flying. Because in the sworn testimony, I've seen no less than 4 or 5 of the Baldwin Felts agents that survived in their testimony admitting they were shooting from the Baldwin Felts side. So in probably the next half hour, 7 Baldwin Felts agents were killed and left in the streets, and that included Albert and Lee Felts, the brothers of Thomas Felts, who ran the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. 2 civilians were killed, and the mayor was shot, and they got him to the hospital, I believe, in Field, and he died that night. So on May 19th, 1920, 10 people died in the streets of Matewan, West Virginia. And I've often said when I was out west and told people about this, if that shooting had happened anywhere west of the Mississippi River, then gunfight at the OK Corral would just be a footnote in American history, because it's that important. And it was arguably the deadliest gunfight in American history. And it's a fascinating thing. And that the 2 brothers of Thomas Felts winding up dead, that's true. Thomas Felts on having focus his attention on trying to nail the people that killed his brothers. And that's pretty much what breaks down. Lively had a restaurant in Matewan, and it was down below the UMW, the mine workers headquarters, was upstairs to it. And so that's what led to this. And he would often get information. He fed that back to the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. And when he wrote out the things that he had learned, he gave his reports, he would act like he was mailing them to a girlfriend or a business that he had to do as far as running this restaurant. And they would go, he would sign them number 9. And every Baldwin Felts agent that was undercover had a number assigned to them. And from the records that were kept, that Lively was number 9. We don't know too many of the others who they were, because uh, Thomas Phelps had the records destroyed. The Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency, I believe, in the late 20s, early 30s, right before they died. And all the records are destroyed except a few involving the deaths of Thomas Phelps' two brothers, Lee and Albert. He kept that in a box at a business he had, and that was discovered many years later. And where we learned about Charles Lively and him being agent number 9, that would have probably been lost to history had he not kept that information. But Lively, who is a fascinating soul, Lively testified quite often, and I was able to learn all this records that were digitized finally and made available to the public, which was a big help to me in writing my book, because I'd been searching for information on Lively for years and wanted to write a book about him, because he is mentioned in every book about the coal mine wars, but he had never specifically been profiled. And that was my goal, to write a book on Lively. Well, he was involved in at least two public appearances where he was sworn under oath, and he mentioned, and so he wasn't ashamed of what he did. He was kind of proud of it. But he testified before the United States. Him and Sid Hatfield testified before the United States Senate in July of 1921 and about violence in the West Virginia coal fields. Less than 2 weeks later, one of those men shot the other one to death on the courthouse steps. And that's a great lead into the story. But anyway, I wrote that book. I don't do a lot of nonfiction. And the reason I don't is it seems like it gets me into trouble. It seems like whenever I write a nonfiction book, it seems like somebody gets annoyed with me or something. And my wife, if she had her way, I'd never write another one. But while I'm on the topic of biographies, and that Charles E. Lively, the deadliest man in the West Virginia, Colorado coal mine wars. If you want a really interesting read, check that book out. I like to think my books are all good, but this one is, I did a lot of work on this, and it was a lot of hard work. And I don't write a lot of those because I found out writing novels is much easier. But while I'm on the topic, books of nonfiction works that I've done, I also did this. I did this book about Major Harris, Major Impact. Major Harris was a quarterback for the West Virginia Mountaineers, of which I'm a fan, and he quarterbacked for them in 1987, 1988, and 89. And in fact, Major Harris was the first in the first class to be able, underclassmen were able to enter the NFL draft. And he was drafted in the 12th round by the Raiders. And honestly, I don't know. I don't think that and I know they don't even have that goes to the 12th round anymore. But Major was a super quarterback. He was talented. He was fast, strong, had a good arm on him. But I don't think the NFL was quite ready for Major Harris when he went into pros. And probably had he played his senior year at West Virginia and then went into draft, I think he would have done better. I think he maybe got more money and might have had a better shot. But I still don't think the NFL was ready for that kind of quarterback. They just weren't prepared for what it took and what he needed. I mean, at that time, and I believe Major Harris would thrive today in the NFL because his style of play is similar to many of the people that play today. But he was a guy that improvised on the field and could take a broken play and turn it into a touchdown. And he was exceptional at that. And that isn't a gift that a lot of people have. And So anyway, this was kind of labor of love. I was a fan of Major Harris, and I wrote this book. And it originally started out as an authorized biography, but some things happened along the way. But I'm that book. I've often thought I'd like to rewrite it because it isn't exactly the way I would have done it had I was writing strictly a biography of my own that wasn't intended to be authorized. And I believe that could be made into a better book with that kind of work and a lot of in-depth study. But it's still a pretty good book, and it's actually the only book ever penned on Major Harris and gives his life story. So anyway, that one kind of means a lot to me. But anyway, those are my two nonfiction works. In during the pandemic of 1920, during the pandemic 2020, in one day, I lost 9 books. In short, my publisher went out of business, and he just went out of business. I found out about it by accident, and it was kind of a long story how I found out. But my publisher went out of business, and I lost 9 books in one day. So what that meant was the only books that I had out there for anybody to purchase were just these 2 biographies of Charles Lively and Major Harris. I was a Western author who did not have one single Western on the market. And pretty devastating to a writer and a writer's career when you lose all your books in one day. Well, anyway, excuse me just a second. I got to top off. And they kind of that really was devastating. I mean, you're a Western author and you have no books on the market. It was quite a blow to my writing career. And at that time, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, what do I do now? How do I get these books back in print? Along with the fact that I was still writing manuscripts at the time. And I finally signed with a place called Speaking Volumes, recommended by a friend of mine. And actually, it was a man named Jim Jones who, strangely enough, he just released this album this year, a CD, and one of the songs on it, it's a very good album. One of the songs on it was a song that Jim Jones and I co-wrote. It's called "Ride for the Brand," When You Ride for the Brand. And I'm pretty proud of it. But Jim Jones is the one that recommended Speaking Volumes to me to get my books. Anyway, I signed a contract with them where they were going to republish all 9 titles that went out of print, along with taking the manuscript that I had done, water, and publish that as well. And they haven't quite got it all done yet. And they're still catching up, but they've got several done. I thought I'd talk about them a little bit, the books that I have out there. And the one book I have, and this is a book called Now, you need to understand that's the old cover on the book. That isn't the current cover. So I don't know why I didn't have one out here. I try to keep a copy of all my titles that I've had. Try to keep them up in my bookshelf up there, and just saving them for posterity. Maybe so I can see them. But I try to have every different volume, and some of my books. I've been through 4 covers. I've moved around that much in my writing at times, so that's affected it too. But that's one of my Westerns, and that one's been republished and has a better cover on it than that. And I can't believe I don't have one of those out here, but I don't. Also, I'll get it here in a minute. Death Comes to Red Hawk. That is another book that's been republished by Speaking Volumes. Death Comes to Red Hawk is the introduction of a character named Kellen Malone. And there's a book, and this was written as a standalone Western when I first wrote it. I didn't plan to do anything other than write just a standalone book. And I'm kind of ashamed to admit this. I'd written actually that book and this one. That book and Long Ride to Yesterday had been, and I can't remember the. There was either manuscripts. I believe they were manuscripts 3 and 4 that I wrote, and I can't remember which order. I believe, but they had been books that I had penned. That I had written these books when my daughter, who's the baby of the family, when she was about 2 and 3. And I'd tried to get them published. I had an agent, and I had at least one of these books on a New York publishing house desk, and it was supposed to be published. And according to them, the market died before I got any of these books out. And for that reason, and then it just all fell apart for me. Nothing happened about it. And I hate to admit this, but I got a little frustrated, and I quit. I basically quit writing Westerns, and for several years I didn't do anything with them. I continued writing. I wrote, and I really kicked myself because they were wasted years that I could have been penning manuscripts that could be turned into books now, and I deeply regret it. I'm ashamed of it. I hate to even admit it out loud, but it's the fact. And so I'm telling people, maybe you're a writer, you could use it as a cautionary tale, but keep writing. But anyway, I was published in a newspaper. I continued to write, but I didn't do anything with these. These manuscripts were basically thrown in a drawer, and I thought maybe that dream was completely dead. But when she was about 19, my daughter, I had the first one of these books published. And what is how much I'd walked away from the whole thing. My daughter, when I had that book published at 19 that I'd written when she was about 2 or 3, she never knew I'd ever written a Western up to that time. She had no idea, because apparently I didn't talk about it either. It was just some I kind of set aside, and that's kind of what I did. And I thought, and sometime right around her 19th birthday, I got the bright idea, I'm going to try this again, see if I can get those books published. And I did. And my daughter found out I was an author, and had been for a long time, but I hadn't done anything with it. So it was kind of a surprise to her. So anyway, that's kind of the way it worked. But and it took a long way around the barn to tell you a story. As I said, the Death Comes to Red Hawk was the first book, one of the first books I penned, and it was either my 3rd or 4th manuscript. And when I had it published, and then I decided, now that I got one published, I decided to write another book. Well, I kind of didn't quite know where to go with that. What was I going to write? Well, I remembered the Red Hawk book, and I read through it again, and finally decided I love these characters in here. Maybe I'll write a sequel to it. And that book is Death Rides the Rail. And for some reason, I don't have that one either. I'm really doing great here on this live stream. One thing about live stream, it highlights your your mistakes and dumb things you did. But the first book in the Callum Malone series is Death Comes for Red Hawk. The second book is Death Rides the Rail. The third book in that series, and that one right now is Nicodemus. That's the old cover as well, and that book is currently being published. Fact is, I went through and proofread that one, and that one will be released. So that's an old cover as well, and that one will come out. That's book number 3 in the Kel Malone series, and that book is kind of interesting because it features a historic black town called Nicodemus in that story, which I'm just fascinated by. And it was a town started by and populated by former slaves in Nicodemus, Kansas. It's fascinating. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and I actually talked to a woman that's involved in that here at the Western Irish Convention out in Tulsa here a couple weeks back, and that was an interesting conversation we had, and I'm kind of proud of that book. But that's number 3, Nightfall Over Nicodemus. Number 4 in there, that book is The Evil Day. That's number 4 in the series. That book right there is it's kind of funny to me. Dad read that book, and Dad liked my work. Dad was kind of proud of my writing, but Dad didn't care for that book very much. And that book was a hard book to write, by the way. It involves a old West serial killer, and they did exist back then. And I think in the author's notes, I actually detail a couple of them. But it was a fascinating time and it was kind of a weird book to write because it involves an actual serial killer, and honestly, that was probably one of the most difficult books I ever penned. It just you was involved in things, and it just felt like you were immersing yourself in the darkness, and it just seemed like it was hard to get out of that, and that mindset that it would take to write that kind of thing. I can't imagine doing it all the time, but Dad didn't care for that book. And I remember I went out to his house one morning, and he was about always there at the kitchen table when I'd go out there in the morning. And I asked him, I said, Dad, did you like that book? What'd you think of it? And Dad kind of changed the subject. It was slick. I didn't notice it. And then we talked about this or that, probably about West Virginia sports or something for a while and what was going on in the farm. And then I asked him, I said, well, Dad, what did you think of my book, Evil Day? And he changed the subject again. And at that time, it was more it was more obvious that that's what he was doing. And I'm sure we went on and talked about, hay or whatever was going on at that time. And and then finally, I felt like then he was definitely dodging me. And I asked him, I said, Dad, what'd you think of my book? You read it, didn't you? He said, yeah, I read it. I said, you didn't like it, did you? And Dad goes, well, no, I didn't. I didn't like it as much as your other ones. And the fun thing about it, and it's kind of painful for me too. Those of you who've been around here know that my dad got killed in a farming accident in November 2018, which was a tough time, and I got to call at work kind of the same way I did when my mom died. I got that call at work too, and when my 16-month-old nephew died in a fire, I got that call at work, and so you just kind of get the feeling that everything bad in your life happens to a phone call at work, and so maybe that contributes to you not liking work, and maybe blaming it for your problems because it seems like all the bad phone calls you get in your life all come from there. But anyway, Dad didn't care for the Evil Day very much, and so what I told you there definitely has a point. uh, I wrote this book, Paladuro. That is the fifth book in the Kel Malone series. And I had that book. That book came out right before Dad died there in November. And Dad and I had already talked, and I was going to, he had a place in Florida where he went during the winter. Dad got to where he didn't much like the cold, kind of like I don't. I don't care for it much either. I don't care for wintertime. I don't mind it as bad since I don't have to go out to work in it now every day. And I might even get to where I don't mind winter, but I don't much care for it. And I had this book. Actually, a friend of mine had this book in his hand, and I hadn't received my author's copies yet when Dad passed away. And even if I got it and I was supposed to get it, I was going to get this book and my dad to the airport where he's going to fly back to Florida. And my plans were to give him that book to read on the airplane. And that never happened because about 3 or 4 days before he was supposed to catch a plane back to Florida, he was killed in an accident there on the farm. And which came as a great shock to all of us. Dad was 81. He's a tough old bird. And but he didn't make it through that. And so I never got to ever, and this is what frustrates me just terribly. I never got the chance to ever show him that book as much as I wanted to. I never got the chance for him to ever see it because I knew he would like this one better than the other one. And it kind of picked up where that story left off. It would have been a great chance to show him that book, and I never got that opportunity. But every now and then, so that one's not back. That was the original cover from the other publisher who shall be nameless. Yeah, that cover too. Actually, that was one of the few covers they ever did I kind of liked, but I'm not really a cover guy. Some of these covers, in particular, this one right here, my Long Ride to Yesterday. My wife loves that cover, and my kids like it, so I don't care for it. And but they think it's a great cover. I suppose the part that I don't care about, maybe I'm a little too literal. The characters on the front don't look to me like the characters I saw in my mind when I wrote this book, and the way they did that, I don't think they look too right as far as the period either. But what it looks like is a book's been made into a movie or a television program, and it looks like they took the actors that played them and put them on the cover of the book like they often do when a book becomes public. I mean, such as, well, the book that I just read, that was like Killers of the Flower Moon that we just read. That book here, no, I didn't write that. I wish I had, but no, I didn't write that. We just read that book, and book originally had another cover on it, but of course, Leonardo DiCaprio starred in that, and so they put his picture on the cover of the book, and that's what that long ride to yesterday reminds me of. Like it had been in a television series or a film, and they'd photograph the characters that were in the book and maybe give you a screenshot from it, and that's the way they made the cover of the book, and that's what reminds me of. I know that hasn't happened. Nobody, no producers or anybody's ever optioned my books for a film yet. If there ever was one that screamed out to be made into a film or a documentary, it'd be that book on Charles Lively, because that's a fascinating individual. But I pretty well come to the conclusion that I don't know anything about art, and I best leave art to people that know about it, such as such as artists, and I'll try to write because some of the covers I like, and a lot of them that they've done for me. Speaking Volumes has, I'm real proud of. I like them a lot, but that cover I don't really care for. But I trust my wife and my kids, and some of you fans out there that read my work. Some of you have read it and you've liked it, and you think it's a great cover. So so I just let them do the covers, and I'll just try to write them and leave that work to the people that know something about it, which I'm obviously not one of them. And sometimes you guys ask me, you'll come along and ask me how I started in this business, and I kind of already told you that. But what I called this video, this live stream, what I called it was it's all about the writing, and that's what it's all about. Everything else I do, other than, professional wise, my faith and family have to take the first priority. My wife says sometimes she's not sure that's the priority she gets, but uh, I try to make that important. I try to focus on it, and so everything's about the writing. This YouTube channel here, the Rumble stuff, the broadcasts that I do, the things on Rumble, all that is secondary to my writing because that's where it starts, where what matters about all of it, and I try to make that priority of my professional life. And since I retired, I try to really focus on a lot, and I hope I've done that. I mentioned a little bit ago about the song that we wrote. I'd had a weird idea here for a few years ago, and I told you earlier in this broadcast about how sometimes you have an idea, but you're not mature enough for it. You're not ready to do it yet, and that was kind of the way it went when I decided to do this writing. I just I didn't think I was, and I didn't think I was. Frankly, I'd wanted to write something that be made into a song for several years. But frankly, I just never had anything I ever thought was worth sending off to somebody and see if they maybe put music to it. And it's a pretty extraordinary thing when somebody does that. And then one day I just woke up and I had an idea in my head, and I got up probably about 6 or so, and by about noon that day, I had the lyrics to a song, and I contacted a writer, singer songwriter, a friend of mine, and he actually put music to that and recorded on his phone where he's playing his guitar with music to it, and actually that the words in that poem that I penned, I recorded it to the sound of another song by this artist, and that's how I wrote it. I was hearing that music in my head, and I penned the poem to meet the music, and it kind of opened up a new way of creation for me. And I've penned several poems, and that was the one I did with Jim Jones when he ride for the brand. That was penned with my mind hearing another song, and I wrote it to that, and Jim did a lot of work on that, and it wasn't a lot of he did a lot of the heavy lifting on it, but he put music to it and he recorded it, and it came out in January, which is a big thrill for me. So I've actually, that was a kind of dream or goal I had to help write a song. It's kind of extraordinary because I have no musical ability. My mom is a great singer. The fact is, you can hear one of her songs on YouTube. I actually found a recording of it out there and put it down there to save it for, could say posterity, but I threw it out there so it wouldn't get lost and I could listen to it and kind of be reminded of my late mother who died in 2003 when she's just exactly the same age as I am right now. And mom was not in good health, and she passed away early. And over a quarter of my life has been lived without my mom, and and I'm probably more adjusted to that than I was by passing my father. Although neither one of them goes easy. You lose a parent, you just don't quite. Your mind's not set to live in a world that don't have mom in it or not have dad in it. You're not prepared for it. You don't know how to handle it. You don't know how to deal with it, and so I went through that. But I've uh, often been sad that my mom never lived. The first book I published, a gentleman locally published that book. It was a series of biographies of World War II veterans. Mom couldn't see very well because diabetes had messed up her eyesight, and I recorded that book on, well, it's cassette tapes back then, and you younger people won't even know I'm talking about cassette tapes, but you maybe seen them, but you don't know what they are. But I recorded on cassette tapes, and mom was able to listen to my first book. But mom never lived long enough to see me publish any westerns. Mom wasn't a western reader, but I can assure you, I would have been. Mom would have read my books, and I would have been her favorite western author. And I just kind of hate it that she never lived to see me achieve some of the success and I'm not remarkably successful, but I have put out 13 books, and I'm working on my 14th, and and that is something I've accomplished. And mom never lived long enough to see it, and that bothers me a lot because I've been named a finalist for a Spur Award, which was quite an accomplishment in 2022. And this year, I was actually presented with what they called the Branding Iron Award from the Western Writers of America, and I was presented that award and that award involves service to the organization, and I'm really proud of my association with the Western Writers. I wish I'd joined them years before I did because it's been a great experience for me, and I just got to know so many fantastic people. Honestly, the people among the Western writers are some of the most kind and gracious people I've ever known in my life. It's been extraordinary getting to know them, be a member of this group, and having that chance to. And I wish to heavens I had done it years earlier, but that was back in that period, that dark period where I wasn't writing and I wasn't doing anything when the whole had the agent in the book I was going to get published, and it never happened. And that was that period right there where I was the first mention of the Western Writers of America. I probably didn't even know they existed at that time. And I was told by my agent about it that I ought to come to conventions. And I truly wish I'd done it because I believe my writing career would be a whole lot farther along than it is right now had I done so, because I've been blessed and I've achieved so much from my association with them, and I didn't get involved with them just to get things, but I've made so many wonderful friends and contacts that have led to other things. Like, well, when my books all went down, it was somebody new through the Western Writers of America that was able to suggest where I could go and get those books published again. And so these associations, and some of you may know, I've also been a president of West Virginia Writers, and I'm involved in that organization. I've got some dear friends in that too. And if you're going to be an author, you're going to be a writer, and that was something you wish to do, you need to be a member of an organization such as the Western Writers, the West Virginia Writers, and I'm past president of that organization, Western Writers of America. I am the current Spur chair for them, and I conduct their Spur Awards contest every year, which has 17 categories, 3 judges in each category. I do that for them every year, and this is starting my 3rd year running a contest for them, and it's challenging. It's kind of challenging work at times, and at times it can be frustrating, but I enjoy it. I enjoy the challenge of it, and it's been a great opportunity for me, and I'm just so grateful and thankful that they've trusted me with it. And I mean, it grew up, and I've talked about this a little bit, uh, not talked about it on here too much, but when I was in elementary school and going into high school, I was a guy that couldn't talk. I couldn't talk in public. My mother and father would not send me into a store to buy anything because I couldn't talk to the clerk. I couldn't go in and purchase anything. If I needed to ask them a question, it was going because I couldn't talk. I wouldn't talk. And when I went into high school, I joined the Future Farmers of America, the FFA, and they required you to give speeches, and they it forced you to do that. And somewhere along the line of doing that, I got to where I could talk a little bit in public. I ran for treasurer of the Warren High School FFA and was elected there. And then the next year, I was elected president. Well, the president of that organization conducted their yearly banquet. He was basically the MC. And I remember my dad saying to my mom, does he realize that he's going to have to head up that banquet next year? Well, I did, and I was able to talk up there. And that was the first time in my life that my mom and dad had ever seen me really get up in front of people and speak. And they couldn't believe that transformation. And a whole lot of me being on YouTube now, me being up in front of people, conducting a Spur Awards luncheon and presenting these awards in front of people like I did out there in Tulsa. I could not even have done that without my time in the FFA because they made me a speaker and taught me to talk in public. And this stuff I tried to do now wouldn't work unless I could do that. And so I'm so grateful for my time in the FFA. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be in front of this microphone right now if not for Future Farmers of America. And I'm truly grateful for that experience and what they meant to me in my life and in my career. And that's how that all came about. But you're talking about a guy that couldn't even talk in front of people. And somewhere along the line, through that, I learned. And actually, I ran in my old ag teacher at the Barlow Fair this past September. And I pretty well related this story I just shared with you to him. And I think he was gratified. His name was Alan Clark. And I think he thanked me for it. And I think he was gratified to learn how much it had meant to me and what it meant in my life. And that probably I wouldn't be doing anything that I'm doing right now without my membership in FFA and what it meant to me. And I'm just grateful for that. I mean, it took a kid that couldn't talk in front of people. Now he's out trying to do a YouTube channel and he's speaking. And there I was getting my branding iron award out in Tulsa. And I'm standing there looking out over that crowd. I got Johnny Boggs behind me and John Chandler behind me. And between those two guys, they won 8 Spur Awards between them. They're sitting there on each side of me, listening while I talk. And out in the crowd, I'm looking at the greatest and most prolific writers in the world of Westerns right out there in front of me. They weren't all there because not everybody came, but and some of the greatest Western writers in America are out sitting out in that crowd. Along with it, there's Craig Johnson, who wrote the Longmire series that you probably seen on TV, even if you didn't write the books, uh, or even if you didn't read the books. And he's out there in the crowd, and there I am up there uh, giving a little speech after receiving my award, and I'm just sitting there thinking, this is unbelievable to me. Here I am out talking to all these people, and guy couldn't even talk to folks, and here I am speaking to this, and I'm thinking, in my wildest dreams, when I was a kid back in high school, I could never see any scenario where that ever happened, that I'd be up talking before all those people. And even when I first started writing, I never saw that. I never saw uh, me being known among so many great authors and them calling me by first name. I never saw that ever happen, and I thought I'd just be a little unknown author living back in Little Hocking, Ohio, and just former West Virginia kid that just trying to get by and figured nobody ever know who I was, and it's bizarre to me and just a little unusual to think that I'm out there with people and they call me by first name, some of the greatest writers in America, and they know who I am, and I still have a little trouble getting used to that, but I've been pretty blessed in my life, and it, I guess some of the success that I've enjoyed and some of the things I've accomplished, it just kind of proves that God takes care of fools sometimes, and that He smiles on idiots, and I've been blessed, and I'm thankful for the things I've accomplished, and much of it couldn't have been done without my wife. I can't minimize her impact in my life. She made sacrifices and believed in me when nobody else did. And I wouldn't be where I was today, and I wouldn't be doing the things I'm doing today without the love and support and encouragement of my wife, who's 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 not always got the best end of the stick, and she's stood by me and been right there and been an encouragement and made sacrifices to make my dreams or goals come true. I'll never be able to thank my wife enough for all she's done, but I've just been blessed. The Lord's been good to me, and I had two good parents. I've got a great wife. I've got three great children and a nephew that I raised, and they're great kids. And I've got grandchildren. sometimes I lose count of just how many I do have, and God's just been good to me, and that's kind of why I'm here. But I thought I'd do this live broadcast today, tell you a little bit about my books and my writing and kind of how I got where I am today, and what drives me and the things that pushes me onward, keeps me going. And I thought that was important to bring up today, and I wanted to do this live broadcast to talk about it. I know I probably rambled. Today, you're seeing me like I really am, because I'm, my wife says I get chasing rabbits or chasing squirrels and stuff. Oh, squirrel! And she says I do that so I'm probably rambled a lot on this live stream today, but that's kind of what I do. And what you've seen for the last hour or so is me and my natural element, and kind of how I am, because I get wrapped up, and I'll see this and I'll chase that for a while. But the books, it's all about the books. It's always been that with me, and that's what drives my career. YouTube channel, the videos I do on Rumble, I wish you'd check them out. But more importantly, the writing, the book, the things that I penned, those are the things that drive me. This behind faith and family is what means the most to me. These books and writing these books, and I wish you could read them. And anyway, that's why I wanted to come to you today. It's been a great joy to talk to you and to share this with you. I thank you for stopping in. I'll catch you again later. Bye now.